Hey everyone, Matron here bringing you another StarCraft 2 commentary. Wanted to bring you a quick game between KeX, spawning as the red Protoss, and Syntic, spawning as the blue Terran player. There was a thread that went up on Team Liquid, the strategy forums, talking about a specific build that counters Protoss pretty well. Most of the things that Protoss does early on, this build is able to counter from the Terran player. So I wanted to take a look at this replay, which the person did post, and basically give you guys a look at this build and kind of talk about the strengths and weaknesses perhaps of it, and maybe something that the Protoss player can do. There's a lot of talk back and forth on the forum about possible counters for this build, and nobody really had a great answer. It's basically going to require a little bit of micromanagement or some insane blind build where you absolutely just try to counter this build first and foremost without any scouting. So we see both players opening up, same as always, that 9 pylon, and then Terran throwing down that supply depot. Going to do a little bit of a scout as well. That's quite an early scout for Terran. Usually you see them scouting after the barracks. But you might want to see the timing on this gateway, see if it's a 2-gate attack or a cybernetic score. So KeX is going to throw up, I think that was a 13 gateway, and then send out his own scout. See Syntic moving along the sides here. He did grab that watchtower to make sure nothing was being built in the vision that you could see with that. So we see the barracks almost finished here, and a gas almost complete as well. Throw up the production tab. So we see a gas coming up for both players right now, and then a second pylon coming from KeX. The second pylon timing is a little bit strange for Protoss. Some people do it a little bit early, and I think this was a little bit early. It usually you can throw up a cybernetic score before that pylon and still create that pylon before you get side blocked. Though he did throw up the second assimilator, not yet using that. So that is going to delay the cybernetic score, as he did have to throw up the pylon and then the assimilator. So I think it was a little bit of a mistake on his part. He doesn't have this assimilator saturated yet, and now that he does, even just not many probes on minerals, just these 11 probes, not enough. So I like to get my gas a little bit later. It makes things smoother in the beginning. We see a factory going down for Syntic as he's just pumping Marines out of this barracks nonstop. Does have a few SCVs, not do anything, but he has a wall off here, so any sort of 1-gate zealot or stalker pressure is not going to be effective with this wall off. Now throwing down a bunker as well. So one thing about this build is a little bit early on, the Terran player is kind of weak to early aggression from Protoss. But with Protoss, most Protoss players, just getting out a few units and then timing gateways for when that cybernetic score completes the warp gate tech, you hardly ever see early pressure. So that's one thing that's good to do as any race, is just poke at the front door of the opposing player and make sure that they do have defense, because if they don't, you're able to do a pretty easy job harassing early on. We do see a starport being thrown up immediately and a tech lab being prepared for it on the factory. We do see more and more Marines just coming out of this barracks. He did not throw up a tech lab or a reactor on this barracks. He is just going to keep creating Marines out of it though the entire game. We do see warp gate tech about 3/4 of the way done for KeX, and also doing a decent job creating units out of this initial gateway. One thing this does do is when you create units out of the gateway early on, it's going to prevent early pressure, make you easier to handle it, but it does prevent the number of gateways and that you can throw up. So a lot of people will have a 3rd or even a 4th gateway up right now when the warp gate tech ends, but having gotten out these 3 stalkers and the sentry, that's 425 minerals spent. So if he had cut maybe 2 stalkers, he could have another gateway at this point. So right now he's just on 2 gateways and still creating out of these gateways, not creating warp gates. So another mistake there. Needs to create those, make those into warp gates, as you're going to be able to get out units a lot faster. We see that tech lab was landed, or the starport landed on the tech lab, and now a Raven coming out. So if we look at the unit station, we have 8 Marines and a Raven out. compared to the 2 sentries, the 4 stalkers, and the 1 observer now coming out for Protoss. So this observer does need to move out here and try to see what the Terran player is going for. We see another starport being created, another tech lab was prepared by this factory, and now he does have everything he needs to make this build work. What he's going to be doing is creating Marines nonstop. You see he does have 12 Marines right now and a 13th on the way, and then he's going to be creating Banshees as well. So the Marines do a lot of DPS. They are a little bit squishy to those gateway units, especially the Zealots if they're able to make it in close to the Marines. And these Banshees are quite powerful as well, doing those 2 attacks. Each attack does 12 damage. If we look, 12 damage, 2 attacks, so 24 damage from each of those Banshees, and he's double pumping them. Not going to worry about Cloak right now, as he is just worrying about constantly producing Marines and Banshees. If you look at the Protoss player, got out of Forge, not really sure about the positioning here. He might be trying to throw down an expansion, but he's just on these 2 warp gates, so he doesn't have enough in the way of production structures right now. He's getting out Immortals pretty blindly, as he doesn't know anything that the Terran player has. The Immortals aren't going to be good against these Marines, as the Immortals are much better against the armored Marauders. We see another thing this build does for Terran is this Raven's going to be a detector, able to see any observer that makes it into the Terran base. So quickly taking down that observer. That's one thing you never expect as a Protoss player when you send out that observer, is that they will have a Raven up on time there. So now we see the Protoss player does know about this attack. He's got 3 Banshees, and if we look, he's got 20 Marines. So it looks like a 4th Banshee on the way. So if we just kind of check out what the Protoss player has, now finally throwing up this 3rd gateway here. So much too late on that. He did get up this Nexus, maybe a little bit early even on that, and he just has these Immortals coming out blindly. So if we look, the Terran player is going to move in here, possibly get a cancel on this Nexus if he's smart. It looks like he's going to let that finish, and now warp gates need to be producing units right now. Taking down that Forge, again, not sure about the positioning on that Forge. Early on, that's a decent position, but later in the game, if you don't have a good army, it's going to be trouble for you if you put your buildings out there. See, these probes are being pulled off by KeX, trying to take down this army. Now pause it here, going to explain basically why this army is so effective for Terran. He got the Raven out really early, which means he had enough energy, that 100 energy, to throw down the point defense drone. So the point defense drone is going to intercept any attack from the Stalkers, at least the first 20 attacks, I believe. So the Stalkers are going to be unable to attack basically anything. They're not going to be able to focus down these Banshees, not going to be able to focus down the Raven, though the Raven's done its damage so far. So what we basically have is all these Marines, as we see 22 Marines here, are going to be able to focus down the Zealots, as the Zealots are going to be the only thing able to attack them, along with the few sentries and then the Immortals, which aren't very effective. And then the you can take care of the Zealots first, or you can even focus down the Stalkers. It looks like that's what Syntic might be doing. And once these Stalkers go down, the Banshees basically reign free and are able to take down the Zealots and the Immortals. As we see this point defense drone finally out of energy, but at this point the Terran player still has so many Banshees up and just constantly reinforcing 6 Banshees. So what that Raven's able to do there is throw down that point defense drone, make it so that the Stalkers cannot attack early on, and then you just focus down the Stalkers with those Banshees and Marines. The Marines are just cheap DPS. They do 7, 8 DPS there, and you just can constantly produce them off 1 barracks. They add a little bit of defense if you're able to throw down a bunker. We see the bunker was salvaged, and then the real damage dealers are these Banshees, as you're able to focus down those Stalkers, and then nothing you can do against the Banshees. So wanted to talk about some things that KeX could have done better. Like I said, he was producing out of those warp gates early on. A lot of players like to produce the 1 Stalker and maybe the Sentry so that he can wall off any sort of pressure, but producing that many Stalkers early on, unless you're going to push out and apply some pressure, is just not as smart as throwing up another gateway or 2. If he was on 3 or 4 gateways along with that robotics facility, he would have been much better here. he would have had more units to try to counter this. Not really sure how he could have countered this point defense drone though. The TL forums were talking about possible counters, getting out a fast Colossi, getting out a few Phoenix to take down the Banshees, but I can't really think of a great counter to this build right now. At the 10-minute mark, you could get out one Colossi maybe, but the Banshees could focus that down, and then the Colossi could possibly take down maybe half the Marines, but I think the Terran would just have still too much firepower. People were talking about a Phoenix Colossi hybrid, getting out a Colossi, and then maybe 2 or 3 Phoenix. That might be okay as long as you're still able to produce off 2 or 3 gates at that point, but I'm not sure you're even able to do that. Getting up the robotics facility, the robotics bay, then the Colossus, and then getting out a Stargate as well with a few Phoenix, that's a lot of gas. As we see, KeX pretty low on minerals here. He did lose the Forge and the Nexus here, so he could be about 400, maybe 600 minerals up. So he could have had a few more Stalkers out, maybe 4 or 5, but I'm still not sure that would have been able to take on these Banshees. So we see Syntic did the smart thing, throwing down a command center here in case that attack didn't work. He's going to be in a better position anyway. And still just able to mass produce Banshees here. If we look at his resources, 800 and almost 300, so he probably could have even thrown up another barracks and just pushed out that, or brought on a few Hellions along as well. So a very strong timing push from Terran. You have some places you can go with it as well, throwing up an expansion. Not quite an all-in, though it's very specific. I'd like to see maybe some 1-gate, 2-gate pressure early on, see how it handles that. He did have the 1 bunker with the 4 Marines, but possibly able to push through these supply depots as he is just producing 1 Marine at a time out of this 1 barracks, and is not producing anything out of the factories or starports. The first thing he gets out of the starport is that Raven, which doesn't help much at the start as it doesn't have any energy or the ability to attack. So perhaps some early pressure, definitely more scouting as he wasted a lot of minerals on the Immortal and the expansion there. Might have been able to get up maybe at least some Phoenix to try to take down those Banshees and the Raven along with more Stalkers. So an interesting build from Terran here. As a Protoss player, it definitely scares me as I'm not really sure how I would scout it, as once they wall off here, you're not really sure what they're doing until you get that observer out, and then not really sure how I would counter that exact mix. Be interested to see if this build can stand up to the 4-gate, which comes around between the 6 and 8 minute mark, depending on the style 4-gate. If it can, then I would say it's a very strong build, especially at this level, as it seems quite difficult to counter. I've been going on a little bit long here after the game has ended, but hopefully you were able to learn a little bit. If you're a Terran player, maybe practice this, see how it works, work on the timings, work on that early defense. Let me know in the comments if you're able to practice this as a Terran, or if you've ever seen this as a Protoss player, or what you might do against it to try to counter it. I'm pretty much out of ideas, not really sure what I would do, especially if I saw it in the heat of battle, as it's hard to react to this mix of units. But maybe together we can come up with something to counter this this mix of units, and see how we do against it if we ever face it. So thanks for watching this commentary. Hopefully you learned something, and I'll see you next time.